In today's video, I'm going to go over the Powertec Dust Collection Flexible Hose Kit. This is the 2 1/4 version. Currently that runs about $24 on Amazon as of January 2024, and they make a 4-inch version for $32. Now the basic premise of this is to help you get suction to certain areas where your dust collector otherwise couldn't get, or if the tool itself does not have some mechanism of dust collection, or if you simply need a short extendable hose. Now the kit comes with one large funnel opening, one narrow opening suction hose, 2 adapters we'll call them, that screw into the end of this hose on either end to allow you to then attach the accessories. And then this expands and is extremely flexible, though we'll get to some of the issues later with this, but it's extremely flexible and with no weight on it holds itself fairly well. Now to use this kit, you essentially have to take both adapters and they have a screw-in mechanism on the end. You take them and you screw them in to the flanges on here. Now on one of these ends, I had to cut a little bit of the plastic off to get it to screw in right. They screw in better, in my opinion, when it's compacted, and then you can pull them out from there. It's a very odd mechanism, but it works, and it screws in perfectly once you figure it out. So start with it compacted, screw both ends in, and then go from there. And I just never take these out of here, or at least haven't found a reason so far. So the first thing I want to say up front about this is compatibility with other things is a bit tricky and a bit of an issue. Now, as far as I can tell, all of the Powertec items work with the Powertec system. So if you have their hoses and all of that, you probably are okay with integrating this directly into your system. However, if, for example, you have the rigid vacuum hose, this does not go into there. It's a direct match, so you will need some kind of coupling between the two. And this flexible hose obviously cannot hold on to here because there's nowhere to screw it in, and this pinch is not tight enough. So you will need adapters if you want to go into a 2 1/4 inch hole. This is 2 1/4 inch exterior, 2 1/8 inch internal with a thickness of about 1/16 of an inch for the plastic. So take that into account when you are building your collection if you're going to order this, as to adapters needed to connect it to other existing products. If you wish to go into a 4-inch hose, I use the Powertec 4 to 2 1/4, I believe that's what they call them, reducers. These slip perfectly in there because the brand obviously makes that way. And, you know, something like the rigid vac also slips in there because it's 2 1/4. So you're okay with their own accessories matching up. Now, both of the given heads will fit onto something like the rigid vacuum, again, because this is the same size port. So if you want just these connectors, they may sell them separately, but you can buy them and they will fit onto the standard 2 1/4 vacuum hose size. All right, before we get into testing, let's just very quickly go over the pros and cons of this and why I bought it and the problems I think it has. Now, the first is the price. $24 to get a flexible hose with some accessories seems to be the cheapest you can buy from Amazon or from an American market, not off of Temu or any of the other Chinese ones, which I have no experience with. Second, it comes apart into a relatively small footprint. I can store this in a drawer easily. It is not large. It, contracts enough, relatively easy to store when not in use. The next reason I liked it is because after my rigid vacuum died out, I had these tubes here and these fit into here. So reverse compatibility, going the way the hose normally would, works with these, which comes into play later in getting this to some of the tools. And the last 2 reasons are that it pulls a good amount of air. There's no issue getting air through this thing. Obviously, you lose more suction the more you bend it, the more you elongate it. But I've noticed no real problems having my dust collector pulling enough air through here. And finally, the flexibility. That was the whole point, was that I wanted to be able to angle this towards very specific spots, and that's what this does. There are plenty of competitors out there which are likely more rigid, more able to hold more weight, but come at a higher price point. And I really wasn't sure I wanted to go in on a higher price point until I knew really how I wanted to use the dust collection system. So at $24, I won't feel terrible if I switch later. All right, now let's talk about the cons, and you'll see some of this in the testing. The first is that once you start adding weight onto this, if you have it bent, it gets a little floppy. It gets a little hard to hold it in specific places, which means there is a fair bit of setup time if you are taking this on and off and moving things around. The next thing is that when you turn your dust collector on and all that suction comes through, it pulls this in a different way. So you essentially, while you're doing the setup, have to turn your dust collector on, position this so that you've got it just right. And I've never not been able to get it where I wanted, but it's just time. Then you can turn your dust collector off and then begin, setting up your tool and then turn your dust collector back on, and this will be held in the right position. But you cannot really angle this and get it in the right spot ahead of time before you turn your dust collector on and it starts pulling that air. The next con, and this may or may not be a con, is that you will probably need to get other Powertec adapters and accessories because it's a 2 1/4. If they made a smaller inlet that went into other existing hoses, that'd be great. But if you want to connect this to another 2 1/4 hose, you are going to need some kind of connection adapter between the two. So the cost of this really is going to depend upon what other accessories you need to make it work. And the final con of this, again, which I will show in testing, is that to get this to a specific place, you need lots of other things going on. This is really just the final link in an entire chain of dust collection setup so that this nozzle gets exactly where you want it. Now, obviously, this was not sold as something that would do it all for me, but it wasn't something I really thought a ton about when I was buying it and then realized in hindsight. So for you, knowing that now, it shouldn't be a huge con. You know now that you need to do quite a bit of other setup, but for me, I wasn't thinking about it a ton, and so it was a bit of a surprise. Okay, so let's talk about the setup. The main thing I wanted this for was the drill press, and as you can see, I've got it so that it goes to the drill press. However, to get there, I had to go my 4-inch hose into a Powertec 4-inch to 2 1/4-inch port, up the old arm of my rigid vacuum that I had prior, to which then I could stick in the Powertec hose adapter, the hose, and then bend over here. So if you want a way to get it up there, you're going to need to find a way to get that flexible hose closest to the top, because the more you expand that, the less strength it has. Okay, so I've got the hose run all the way up through my setting, and we get up to this point, and we can move this around, and you have to account for some floppiness and play around with this for a little while. Now that's pretty good. That's roughly where I would like it set up in the end. However, we're now going to turn on the dust collector, and admittedly, this is a relatively decent size powered dust collector, but you're going to watch it and see how it changes position. So you saw the movement there. Now, admittedly, part of that is due to my setup. I have not locked this thing perfectly in place because I need to remove it occasionally, and if I lock it in place, I don't want to have to go through with unscrewing a bunch of things. I've basically just used a bandsaw to cut out a half moon and pinched it in there. But on other things, it does the same thing because it's got a lot of flexibility, so it moves. So to get it in the right place, you have to get it close, turn on your dust collector, and then reposition. Okay, so it's in a great position. I realized I had to raise this table. Now you may be asking, why are you not using this? Well, this is very effective if you know the angle that the chips are going, if they are going to be thrown more than spun out going in a certain direction. And why is that? At least when you choke it down to the 2 1/4, this is a huge opening now all of a sudden that has to pull a large amount of air. You lose a great deal of suction every time you step out. Now, if you could put it right here, that's fine, that's great, but then you would lose a little bit of access to your workpiece. This works really well if you have a direction it is coming from, and you can essentially just set it down. It works very well for things like template routing, and if you wanted, you could put it directly in here. Obviously, for me, that's an issue with this here, but you could put it, if you believe the dust is going in one specific direction, put it there. It works really well at catching things as long as the dust is getting to this area. I mean, we're talking maybe a couple inches out that it needs to be getting to really pull it in there. For doing things on the drill press, I like this more because it's floating. I have all my access. here, and as close as you can get it, it pulls way more. And this isn't a large hole being made, so the chips are all coming out in a relatively similar area. So we'll go do test now, and then I will switch this out and I'll show you with the other one. So as you can see, it did a great job. There's only a little bit left in the hole, but otherwise nothing. I'll drill 3 holes in this without it so you can see how much dust otherwise would have been there, and then we'll switch to the other one. Okay, we're now going to try this one. I will again have to get this close, turn it on, and then test it from there and see how it does. But you can do this one of 2 ways. You could either set it on there like that and move this around, but you do get a little movement here, and you have to be very careful that it's not going to hit the drill bit. I think it will do relatively good here. Or you can attempt to float it, something like that, though you can see right now the floppiness and that this struggles to hold this when it's bent out. So we're going to start, we'll do it setting on here, and then we will do it hovering above. Okay, so we see it's nowhere near as good as the other one, but it's not terrible. I could see plenty of chips going up, but we've still got a fair bit left on here. And if you ever need to pick this up and move it, you then would have to do this. And with it setting on here, you're also allowing yourself to not lose all the air coming up through there. Now, I couldn't get it any closer because the chuck is going to run in to this if I go down and it's there. I'm going to hit that coming down. So you are basically limited by how close you can get it to your chuck. And again, this thing essentially loses a lot of suction with every inch further you go away. All right, we're going to now float it over the top and see how it does there. As you can see there, with it floating, absolutely terrible. I'm not sure anything got pulled up. All of that is still there, and I don't want to say useless, but pretty close to useless with choking it down to 2.5. And I have a 1.5 horsepower dust collector, so nothing wild, but it clearly works much better with the narrow one when you can get it very close. Again, you're limited by your chuck here, your spindle, whatever that's called, and how close you can get it. And again, with every inch going away, you lose so much suction. Now, this would be different if the dust is being thrown towards it. But here, it's essentially just kind of coming out maybe an inch or less high and then going right back down. There's no velocity, no momentum pushing it towards the inlet so that it can catch the dust as it flies in. The next reason I do like this and use it is because when I got a larger dust collector, I had a 4-inch hose, which isn't going to go into my benchtop bandsaw or my benchtop router. These are 2.25-inch ports. Now, fortunately, this happens to fit inside both of them. And because, as you can see, I've got a very awkward bend here, this allows me to have a very short connection right into there. Previously, I was using the rigid vacuum hose and having to go over the top because it wasn't as flexible. So for this purpose, that works really well on that bandsaw going around a tight curve. And it works great into this one. And one thing you'll know about dust collection if you're looking into getting something bigger is the shorter the distance, the better. That means I didn't have to have a big, long, old rigid hose coming down. I could get this 4-inch port really close to the entrance there. So these adapters do go well into tools with 2.25, 2.5, I'm not sure. Some of them call them different things, ports. They slide in and it works really well. And to do this, obviously, you need one of the Powertec or other adapters, a hose clamp, and then it just goes right in. So another thing you do have to buy. Okay, the next major place I use this dust collection hose is at the router table. Now, the router is a particular kind of bastard when it comes to collecting dust, especially at the table. You will either have dust that gets pulled out or dust that goes under, or both. Now, you can get or make, in the case of this table, some kind of housing to sit around your router and then pull the dust out the back. That's my eventual goal. But for now, I use this to move the suction towards the areas of the router that come down. I've got to make some sliding drawer slides, some dovetail drawer slides for a shop project here. So I'm going to do a few cuts that require the piece to be directly over the bit. Obviously the dust cannot go out, and therefore we're going to try to get this up as close as possible into underneath here to pull the dust out as it goes. It's a bit of a, I don't want to call it a lost cause. You're going to get maybe 20, 30%. Well, you get 100% of the direction essentially that you're coming from. But because the router spins in a 360 degree, it's going to throw dust everywhere. Now, I've not spent a ton of time trying to map out where best to put this. And in fairness, I can't really put it in front of me. So even if that is the best position, that's not going to work really. Now, to get this up in there, I had to use quite a few things. I had to make a mount to put on the side of the cart to then hold this extender, which then this adapter goes into, which then this will go into to bring it up high enough so that I can then bend this into the router without the weight of the attachments causing it to flop away. Now, I'm planning on doing, if you see this, I've done it, a sped up version of me setting it up. And that is one of the cons of this, though I say con in that it's unfortunate, but it's just part of the product. You have to do a lot of setup. Now, I'm in my early 30s, so my knees and back still work relatively well. But you'll see me setting this up and just how much work is needed. If you were going to leave this in place, perhaps that's perfectly fine. But each time I want to do this, I have to come over and set this up. So I'll put this on the fastest time lapse possible. But I just want to show all the work that has to be done to get this to the area of the router I want to collect dust to, because you need to know that if you're buying this to collect dust. Now, on some dados, people collect it out the end here, but what I found is that most of it still goes underneath, and you only get a little bit of a shot out there at the beginning. You can put it on the end if you want, but I go underneath. Okay, it's 1:08. I'm going to attempt to go as fast as possible. We'll see how long this takes. Next comes the tube that goes through. Dust collection hose. Okay, now that's not a perfect fit because I needed this to go in and out and it tapers. But we're here now at this part. Now I'm going to show you both types of head options with this. We're going to start with the big boy. Now you obviously have to decide, do you want to go around, do you want to go under? I generally come out to this side as it's just the easiest place to get to for me. And then we have to turn the vacuum on, see if it moves it at all, and then reposition if needed. Okay, that was about 2-ish minutes. Give or take, and we've got it set up. Almost never does it stay in put the first time I turn the vacuum on. It almost always moves some, and I have to go down, readjust, turn it off, turn it on, and double check. Partly right now, I've got it a little bit wedged between the lift and the table here because this simply, when it's out this far, cannot hold its own weight. It just doesn't have that kind of rigidity all the way through this, so wedging it a little bit or resting it. You can't get as close as you'd like doing that, but we're going to do the test now. I'll run one with nothing on so you can see the dust, and then I'll vacuum that up. Oh God, I gotta vacuum that up, and then we'll do it without. Okay, I've put the camera at this angle. I don't know if this is going to be something even that can be seen. The dust may be flying too fast, but I'm just going to run it through once, which is a straight bit, cutting a groove out as I would do normally. To take out the bulk of the waste before the dovetail bit, and hopefully you can see what's going on under here. Okay, that is with no dust collection whatsoever. We've got dust all the way around. We've got dust in every corner of this entire base. So dust everywhere. That was no dust collection. Okay, so we had the large adapter faced at this angle, and what do we have? Well, we have dust everywhere except this one area. So, you know, really good directionally, it's quite clean, but there's nothing it can do about the rest of it. So it helps, and I do set it up every time. I normally use the small nozzle, so we're gonna use that one now. Okay, I've now got the little guy wedged up there about as close as I can. You'll see I do have the big insert ring in there, and I normally do on cuts like this because I want the dust going down. But if you have the smaller insert ring, more is going to come out the other end and less will come down. So if you prefer to sweep the floor, then you can do a smaller insert ring and still use this. Okay, here's the small nozzle dust collection. As you can see, still plenty of dust everywhere, except for in that area. Now, for the purposes of testing, I'm gonna go ahead and put the smaller insert ring in, and we'll take a pass with that, and you'll see there will be less dust below, but the floor will then be dusty. Okay, as you can see, still plenty of dust, maybe 10% better on this side. Like, you know, it clears everything on this side of it, really, in this angle, which is really all you can ask of it. It can't capture 360 degrees of flying dust, so it is what it is. You know, I set it up every time, like I said, because it helps, and I'd rather do less cleanup at the end if possible. But it's just not where it shines. There's a reason they make encasements, housings for routers that the dust hose goes into. So if you're looking to get this just for your router, I wouldn't really suggest it. If you're looking to get it instead of the rockler thing that sits off the end here, it does an okay job. It doesn't solve any of the other dust collection underneath or anything, but if you're just trying to pick up what's coming out here, it's not a bad addition if you can split your dust collector another way. Okay, the last place at the router table, and I actually think this shines a little bit here, is flush trimming or doing any kind of freehand round over whatnot, as long again as you figure out where the dust is going. This can take a little setup time and practice, and again, depending upon what shape you're doing. You also have the conundrum of not wanting to run into it, so you have to pay attention to what you're doing here. If you're doing some odd object that you're going to run in, you're going to have to figure that and plan that ahead of time. When you turn this on, again, it will move just like the other times. And if you get it too close, it has a tendency to suck itself in. And I've gotten dangerously close to the router bit before because I was being lazy and thinking, oh, I just need to get this almost done, just a little more. And it ends up, you know, like right here, almost touching it. So if you can get the direction right, I'll show you here. I think it does a pretty solid job. So you'll see I had to move it over here. Obviously, I should have known that the router bit is spinning this way. It's going to scoop the dust out. I wasn't thinking ahead of time. But when it's placed in the direct area, as long as when you're routing, you're kind of facing in a little bit. You're getting most of it here. This is, you know, some still over here, and there's some behind this from when it wasn't there. But pretty good. I'm going to toss a round over bit on this now and then just do the round over of this whole thing. Got the round over bit on here, and I've set it pretty high to take a pretty deep cut so we can just get a bunch of dust and chips going. So I'm just going to round over the whole side of this, and I'm going to leave this positioned over here. In theory, the dust should still go that way. If it needs to be repositioned, I'll do that. Okay, so not too bad. We still got some up here. Unfortunately, one thing I had to use this larger ring because the Freud bit will not fit through the smaller one. So you lose some dust being pulled down there, kind of limiting the ability of this. Because remember, as this sucks, it's going to be drawing along this area. The farther away we go, the worse the suction is. So the force of the dust to go down is going to be relatively strong compared to this without this limiting where it can go. So mixed bag. This will change obviously depending upon the router bit, and perhaps I could have moved this even closer, but I thought it was easier to film with it a little further back. So, you know, pretty good. I would set this up. I do set this up every time I'm doing this because I think it collects more to make it worth the time to set it up. Okay, the final place I use this is over my scroll saw. A lot of modern scroll saws come with an air blower of some sort. This is an old Craftsman one I got for free. So if I don't use this, and prior to having this, I couldn't really wear a mask. I'd have to blow the dust off constantly because it's impossible to see when that fine dust builds up. It works okay. It gets in the way, obviously, some of your vision. It's a little awkward. Eventually you get used to it and it kind of disappears from your vision. But at first it's awkward and you have to pay real close attention to make sure this is not hitting up against there at all times. And you can't get it too close or else it'll suck itself down to the workpiece. Okay, so as you can see, fairly effective. I was able to see the entire time. I didn't have a line to follow. I'm going to have to check the replay, but I'm like 90% sure it just sucked up the entire part that came off of this, so I'll have to look for that. But effective for keeping this clean while you're cutting, as long as you are okay with the vision, and then of course the awkward nature of your hand and it sitting over. There's a reason they use a dust blowing system instead of some kind of vacuum system. Now you could move it to the back if you want. Just from my setup, I haven't put any kind of mount on this yet. So maybe in the future a mount on this that pulls it back that way. I don't know, we'll see. I do things slowly. I'm not a quick mover when it comes to implementing new things, but not bad. And we'll go into the final thoughts now. Okay, so final thoughts here. At $20, $25, something like that, the Powertec dust hose collector should be primarily viewed, in my opinion, as a drill press dust collection. I think that's what most people are buying it for. That's what I initially bought it for. I ended up using it for other things because I like to use what I buy for as many things as possible. But if you're looking for a cheap drill press dust collection arm, something you can position, $20, this is a great start. You're not going to be thrilled all the time with it. Setup time, it's finicky. But you're not going to sit there and think, my money's totally wasted. Down the road, you may buy a better one. I'm sure there are better ones. I'm sure some of the more expensive ones hold much better. This tends to get floppy the more weight you add to it. In the kit, again, you get these two connectors that get screwed into either end, and you get two nozzle ports to go along with it. And I'm very happy with it. It's a bit annoying, but I'm happy even if it's just for my drill press. And I think that's what you should consider it as, is a drill press accessory that can do a few other things. Let me know if you have any questions, comments. If you want me to test something that I'm able to do, I'll go ahead and give it a try. And the last thing I would say is that with any dust collection accessory, the amount of suction your dust collector pulls matters. I don't know how it'll perform with a shop vac. I don't know how it'll perform with a 1 horsepower. I've got a 1.5. It may be overwhelmed by a 5 horsepower dust collector. I don't know. They also make a 4-inch port of this. I struggle to see how that's going to hold itself up well. The 2 1/4 already gets a little floppy, but if you're looking for a 4-inch, they do sell one. I also think if you're looking for a way to get to a 2¼ port on a machine and you want a short distance, or you have to go around some awkward bends, this is actually really useful for that, even though they don't really advertise it as that. This goes into most 2¼ ports bandsaw router, as I showed earlier. So it's a clever little use for that as well if you're trying to snake your way to a port. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good one.